Oh my God, guys, what is that awful noise? Hey guys, George at SoundTraxx here, and this week we're going to do a quick little installation. We're going to show you how you can upgrade this obnoxious sounding Broadway Limited C30-7. Now, we're going to go ahead and show you step by step how we take the circuit boards out, and we actually do put in a Blunami so that you can get a lot better sound than whatever that is. So guys, we're going to go ahead and go to the workbench. We're going to start taking this thing apart, and we're going to show you step by step how to make it happen. So let's go ahead and get over there. Okay, here we are at the workbench. Now, couple of things you'll want. These are box foam that you usually find in a lot of current day manufacturers. You can just reuse box foam so you have something soft to cushion it on so you can protect any details that are on the model. So the first thing we do is we remove the couplers. That's pretty standard. We've seen that before. And then have a little parts tray nearby so that way you can put all your parts in here so that way when you're working on your model, you can put them there. These are usually just old little food containers or stuff like that, but you can have multiples if you need to keep track of different aspects of the installation. A couple of things I like to have handy is some screwdrivers so we can get the body shell off. You know, like I said, you've got a screwdriver to get the couplers out. Pair of tweezers. These things are going to be invaluable to have because we'll be needing to grab wires and route wires around the model. And then you guys have seen this before. This is an LED tester. It's just a 9-volt battery that's using a 9-volt battery clip. And then here we've got wires coming off with alligator clips so we can clip to the wires. And then in here I've got a 1,000 ohm resistor soldered in the middle so that way we can test the polarity and also the functionality of all the LEDs. This one's starting to show some wear so you can kind of see there. So we should be able to get through this installation. Then I'll have to replace that at some point. And then on the odd case where I need to do 9 volts, then I have a wire coming in here off of my V plus so that way I can bypass the resistor if I need to do power. Don't always need that, but that's a good option to have. So these are the biggest, most important tools. So anyway, once we get the coupler boxes out, then we're just going to go ahead and pull the body shell off, and I believe it just pulls up. There we go. Starting to come. There's some tabs that are holding it on the inside. And then once we pull this off, now you can kind of see what the inside of the body shell looks like. There's nothing up in there. And you can see the electronics that are holding up. Now, there's one light here, one LED for the headlight, which I didn't see a lens to get to the number boards, which were odd because the rear number board's illuminated nice and bright. And then you have the class lights up here. Now, on this circuit board, you can see we've got 2 wires coming out, so these are going to work together. And then there's a small little daughter board right here as well that we can see is holding this LED in place. And so really it's just a matter of pulling these wires up, and then we can remove the whole thing. Now, the other things you'll notice, here's the wires coming from the rear circuit board, and as I mentioned, it's the rear headlight and the rear number board lights apparently. Then we have our track wires coming here. You can see the track wires coming here. But once we take all this out, we'll be able to identify it quickly. And then over here we have our motor wires coming up this way. And then what is this? Oh, these are our speaker wires. So we have our 2 speaker wires and then the 2 motor wires. The gray and the black go to the motor, and then the 2 wires here are going to our speaker. So we'll have to get in here because these are probably wired in parallel. We're going to rewire them in series, and that's what we're going to do excuse me, during this installation. So the good news is this looks fairly straightforward. So what we can do is we can get a pair of cutters. Since we're not going to reuse these plugs, we're going to be soldering to the Blunami PNP, and we have our blue PNP here. And for all the different lighting outputs that we're going to use on this thing, we're going to use resistors, and I'll show you how to do all that as we go. So as we notice, this is the front class light connections here. Now we have our our headlight, which has, this is weird. So this is where our tweezer can come in because my hand's a little thicker. So you can pull these wires out of the way as you see fit. That wire apparently went to one of the same connections. And then we have our one for the headlight goes here and then here. So now our headlight circuit wires are there. We have our motor wires to the front truck coming here. We have our wires to the rear truck coming right here. So we can cut those out. In some cases, you may decide you want to save the connector. I don't need them all that often, but if you want to save the connectors, give yourself a little bit of space that you can resolder to if you need to. And then here's the other wires for the rear light in addition to this one. So we have 3 wires going to the back light. We'll test those and figure out what the purpose of each is. Here's our speaker wire. I know we don't need that much, so we're going to go ahead and save this connector just like this. So we're going to save enough on here, and then we're going to pull it out, and then we're going to set that aside in our parts bin. But we don't need that much wire coming out of there. And then here's our motor leads. Now, that's it. All the wires are disconnected. So now all we need to do, and we can free this circuit board, is take the screwdriver, and I need a smaller tip on the end of it. And there we go. And we're going to remove the 4 screws from the corners. Now again, this is where I like to have the parts bin so I can put everything back into the place. There we go. So you can see I'm undoing this screw right here on this corner. And once that's out, move it over. I've got one over here. And I'm using the tweezers just to help pull it out because it doesn't always fall out on its own. And with the tweezers, that way we can kind of help force it out. And then one last one here. Yep, that one's stuck a little bit. Let me get a different screwdriver out. There we go. And as you can see, once the 4 screws are removed, circuit board comes out nice and clean. And whatever noise that was, we'll never know. So as you can see, now we have our wires. Now, as you tell, it's pretty straightforward. So we can actually get our Blunami here. We can do a quick score of the paperwork. I encourage, if you've never used a Blunami before, that you actually go in and read some of this, because there's a lot of good information in the document that comes with it. I obviously do this for a living, so I don't need to read the packaging myself. But there's a lot of great information. Just undo the staples here on the corner and open it up. There's some basic information, but always check the user's guide. Okay, so now we just need to see where this is going to fit. Now, you can see right here that these screw terminals will line up, but impedes up front here. So what we're actually going to do is we're just going to use some double-sided foam tape, and we're going to mount this just a little bit further back like this. And we can use some double-sided foam tape. We'll insulate it from these screw bosses. But because of the location of this, I don't want to interfere with that. So we're not going to we'll mount it back a little bit. But before we do, let's go ahead and test these lights. What we're going to do is we're going to get our wire strippers. We're just going to strip the ends of these so we can grab the electrical conductivity. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to test the polarity so we know which pole is what. So I'm going to guess black is ground or negative, and then gray is white or clear. And as you can see, our LED illuminates. So the gray wire is going to be our V plus common, and then the black wire is going to be our our function output. Now we're going to test that here on this front class lights on this locomotive. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to strip the end a little bit here, and we're going to test it again to confirm. Black to black, and then gray to red, and you can see our LEDs are illuminating. Everything looks good there. So now we have our 3 wires coming from the back, and this is where we just need to determine which function colors or which wire colors are for what purpose. So we're going to strip the ends of the wires here. Now, let's see. I'm going to guess that our red is probably a V common, but it's probably not. And let's test here. Nope, no lights. Nope, no lights. So let's go gray with our function common and black with the function. And there you go. There's our headlight. And then that means the red wire goes to our number board lights. So there you go. You can kind of see how you can test and verify which purpose is for each wire. So now that we know this, we no longer necessarily need this, but we will test it during the procedure just to make sure. So now, again, before we do the actual decoder installation, we're going to rewire the speakers in series underneath here. So I'm going to go ahead and wet my sponge on my soldering iron. I'm going to turn it on. So I'm going to pause the camera for a few seconds and come back and we'll get started. Okay, so now that we're back, we're going to go ahead and address the speakers first. Now there's 2 screws holding this fuel tank in, which is where the speakers are mounted. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to use the other smaller Phillips screwdriver. And we're just simply going to unscrew these 2 wires, or these 2 screws. And then now we can pull this casing away. And that's where we have all of our speaker mounting. So you can see how this is set up in here. So let's get our screws and we're going to set those aside. Again, we can put them in our tray. Now, when I pull this up, you'll notice that the speakers in this case, let's see how we can get this up. There we go. You'll see that the speakers are wired in parallel, which means they go from one speaker, both wires go to the first speaker, and then they both go to the second speaker as well, but we need to fix that because we need to go from one speaker to the other speaker and then back over. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some desoldering. So these speakers should just pop right out, and we'll put them back in, don't worry. So I'm going to set that aside. So you can see they go to the plus and minus of this first one here. So what we want to do is we want to go from this one. Then from this terminal, we want to go from this negative to this positive. And then from this negative, we're going to go back up. So we're going to replace this black wire. So we're going to take our soldering iron here. Now here's a tip for you. You can see this. Take a tool and set it over your speaker so that the speaker doesn't jump up and magnetize itself to the soldering iron as you're trying to grab it. And what we're going to do is we're just going to desolder the wires here off of this other terminal from this speaker. So just take a second, we'll get this solder softened up. There we go. So now we can just pull these off. And there we go. Now we're good there. Now the second wire, don't necessarily need to desolder it per se. What we can do is cut it. So what I'm going to do is oh yeah, there's my cutters. Ha. So I'm just going to cut this second wire right there. So here's our first wire, and this is the one that's going to go to the decoder. So then what we're going to do is, since this terminal is now open and this wire, we're going to use this wire, this red wire, and we're going to strip the end of that. And what we're going to do now is we're going to solder that to this V negative side right here, because then that way this will become the V minus of the first speaker to the V plus of the second speaker, so that way the speakers are in phase. Because of the way this was wired, we're going to go ahead and solder it on this side. So get your solder over here. And we put a little flux down on here. I'm going to take our wire, put it down. Oops. There we go. There we go. And there we go, and that one's done. So now we just need to replace this with a longer black wire. And then that's what's going to go up to the decoder that we're going to mount up here. So this is really quick, easy process. So again, we're going to desolder this speaker here. And there we go. Wires off. So the good news is that when you replace the wires, you just need to be you can always cut the wire shorter. It's harder to grow the wire. So these are just junk wires. We're going to throw them away. All right, so now I have a black wire that's much longer. So we're going to go ahead and strip the end. Ideally, you want to tin the end of this wire. So we're just going to put a little dab of our flux right here. Now, if you guys are asking, this flux here, this is a company called Chipquik. As you can see, I use quite a bit of it. I'm probably going to need to buy some before long, but this is called Chipquik. It's SMD 291. It's a clear tack flux designed for work on printed circuit boards. And so if you're going to be doing work with decoders, I highly recommend you get something like that or equivalent. If you use just flux you get at the local hardware store, then you can possibly damage your decoders and cause them to have to come in and be sent in for repair. So if you use the proper flux the first time, that problem goes away. So now you see we have a nice clean end, and right here we're going to put a little bit of flux here on the end, or where this is at. Now this time, because the wire is going to be going towards the other speaker, we're going to come in and solder it at this angle right here. So we get a little solder on the end of our iron. Oops, hold on. Almost forgot the pro tip here, because that always makes me nervous when the speaker jumps up and magnetizes itself to the end of the soldering iron. All right, there we go. So that was a quick and easy process. Now the good news is we can just mount these guys back in. And it looked like they were somewhat self-adhesive, so we'll go ahead and put those back in place. And we're just mounting it back in here, just the way they came. And just like that. So, whoop. Looks like we need to put a little bit of adhesive on it. So I'm going to put a little dab of this microscale crystal clear. This is a great all-purpose glue. Just use a little toothpick and put a little dab around the edge here, and this will work as an adhesive to help hold it in. But you want to make sure you put a thin bead, because you want to make sure that you keep the glue to a minimum so that it doesn't squirt out and get on the face of the speaker, which could potentially cause distortion. Another question that you guys may have is, why am I using their speakers? Well, their speakers are actually not terrible speakers. And the other thing is they're actually, oops, don't want to do that. They're actually rated at 1 watt. So if you can see here that says 16 ohm, 1 watt. Actually, we probably could have left those in series, or in parallel, but that's okay. But a 1 watt speaker, this will be fine. This will be nice and easy on the amplifier, and these speakers will sound good when we're done. And if they don't, we can always replace them. So like I said, we're just putting a thin bead of adhesive here along the edge, because again, you want to make sure you don't get it on the speaker cone, because that could cause distortion and or problems later. So now you can see we've got our glue pretty much all the way around where the speaker's going to mount. So we'll take that and put that over here. So now, just need to make sure I remember which way this was. So that was there. This goes this way. So we're going to take our first speaker, mount it down on the adhesive there. Then we're going to take our second speaker. We're going to do the same thing and carefully mount it on the adhesives to make sure that it doesn't move around. All right, and this needs to be turned a little bit. Let's see, there we go. All right, so we're going to go ahead and let this dry. We can put our spacer back here. Oops, let's get this black wire back over to this side. There we go. Now let's go ahead and let this dry for a little bit. The good thing about this microscale crystal clear is it doesn't take long to dry, so this will be good to go here in probably about 15 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and let that dry before we mount it up underneath, and we should be good to go. So we're going to set that aside for the time being. So now we can turn our attention to the decoder installation, and this is going to be pretty straightforward with what we're working on here. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get our double-sided tape, and then we're going to grab our X-Acto knife, and we're going to build up a platform under here for our decoder to rest on. And so as you can see, this is a little bit of a recession, so it's going to take a few layers of tape to get us high enough so that we can clear these posts. And looks like 3 layers is going to do it. All right. Now, as an insurance policy, because again, we don't want the decoder having any parts that potentially can short against this, we're going to get some insulative tape. This is the Kapton tape you can get again at digikey.com, and we are going to put a piece of this across this metal just as an insurance policy. Again, don't need very much. We just need to make sure it's enough to protect and cover the end of this. Okay, there's one, and then we'll do this front one as well. You could even put another layer of double stick foam tape. Honestly, it's probably not going to be a big deal. So what I'm going to do here, though, is I'm going to cut out this piece so that it doesn't get stuck against the flywheel. And so that way it's holding to the side of this weight. Here you can kind of see it's holding on the side of the weight right here and then coming up on top, and then I'm just cutting this window out to make sure that no tape gets on the flywheel that potentially could cause issues with the operation of the decoder or the model. And there we go. So you can see now that we've got our windows open, and these just curl around and adhere to the underside of that. So now we can get our decoder. This oval, or the processor here at the angle, is what would mount forward. So we can go ahead and put this right about there. And you can see that it's almost a perfect fit. Let's move it back a little bit. There we go. Perfect fit right there on top. You can see that it mounts up perfectly. So first thing I usually like to do is do our front and rear track power. So that's going to be these 2 wires coming from the rear and these 2 wires coming from the front. Now, if you're using this in DCC, the track polarity doesn't matter as long as you're consistent from front to rear. So as you can see here, we have our gray wire on the fireman side, and then we have the black wire on the engineer side. So I'm just going to mount that up the same way up here. Now obviously we don't need this much wire, so we can come in and cut this wire a little short. Set that aside. Now we're going to separate this, get our wire strippers, and we're going to trim a little bit of this insulation off the ends, just like that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to tin the ends of the wire, just like this. Grab some solder. I'm going to tin the ends of the wires just to make sure that they hold up together. Then we're going to grab some flux and put it here on the track leads. Now, like I said, the gray is going to go on this side. This is where it pays to be ambidextrous when it comes to soldering, so that you can manipulate the wires where they need to go. There we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up over here like this. And this is just going to solder right here on top. Just like that. Now we're going to do the same thing to the other side, but we're going to do the black wire. So I'm going to come around here, and I put some flux on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this. We're going to come underneath the headlight LED, and we're simply going to touch the wire, and now we're good to go. So there's our front truck lead. Now we're going to do the same thing for the back. Now remember, that's these two wires here. So again, this side is going to be our black wire because we use the black wire here on the front. So we're going to do our wire stripping. And these wires are fine at this length. You can shorten them if you really want to. I don't think it makes that big of a difference. But we'll go ahead and tin the ends of these wires. We're going to put a little bit of solder on the end of our iron. And there we go. Now we're going to put our flux on the tabs for our two track leads. Not sure what happened there, but we can go ahead and now I'm soldering this to the top of the tab. You can go through the hole if you want. 6 of one, a dozen of the other. Doesn't really make that big of a difference when you're doing your installation at all. Now a lot of times, usually when I'm doing this, I'll take these extra wires and kind of hold them back out of the way. I do it normally for two reasons. One of which is it helps keep everything organized, and it helps your wire management. So usually what I'll do, and I wasn't paying attention, is I'll get these self-closing tweezers to kind of hold the stuff out of the way, so that way when I'm working, I know which wire is the next one to grab, because it's not held in place with one of those self-closing tweezers. So all right, so now we're going to do this here. And there we go. Oops, I just dropped my wire strippers. Okay, so now that's in place. So now we're going to take our gray wires that we've determined were V+ on these lights, and we're going to take those and attach them to the V+ terminals on the end of the decoder. Now these are twisted together. I don't need them twisted for all that distance. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to cut this wire right there. We need to leave a little bit just so we have some to play with. And again, we're going to take these wires and tuck them out of the way. grab our tweezer, or grab our wire strippers. We're going to strip the end of the wire. Now we're going to tin the end of the wire. Oops. Let's twist that better. There we go. Okay. And we're going to tin the end here. And then now we're going to solder to the V+. Now, if you look real closely, the V+ terminals are here and here. Now, if you look closely at it, you'll notice that this has an oval-shaped soldering pad right here on the end of the decoder, and that indicates your plus 14 V common. And so that means this is your headlight terminal, this is your backup light terminal, and then your function commons are also going to go to this for your FX3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 lighting output. And then these are the terminals for your speaker, these are the terminals for your motor, and we can go ahead and get all these attached here shortly. So we're going to go ahead and do this back V+ common. So we can turn this up a little bit and just solder it in place just like that. And there we go. Now our black wire is our rear headlight. And as I mentioned, we will need a resistor here. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut the wire about right there. Now I'm going to strip the insulation off the end of the wire. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get some heat shrink tubing. And this is a piece I had laying over. I forgot to get it out. I'll get more out here in just a second. But we're just going to take the heat shrink tubing and we're going to slide it over the wire. Just like that. And then now we're going to grab our resistors. Now in this case I use 1,000 ohm resistors. These are 8 watt. So they don't need to be huge, they just need to be, because they don't draw a lot of heat when you're connecting. So there's 4 resistors. And now what I personally like to do, you don't have to do this, you can pre-tin the wire and then just solder it to the side, but I like to wrap the stranded wire around the lead of the resistor because it helps hold on a little bit better, just in my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. I sell it for the same price. And then once you're wrapped around the wire here, all the way around, then you can simply slide it. Oops, that's coming off. Hold on. There we go. And once it's wrapped all the way around, then we can slide it all the way up against the edge of the resistor, and then we can reduce the footprint of that solder joint. And so we put a little bit of solder on there, or flux I mean, and then we're going to come in, whoops, my wire moved. Now we're going to put our solder on, and the flux helps the solder flow into the joint. So now we have a nice solid joint. So we're going to trim off this excess of the resistor. We're going to throw that away. And then, because these resistors are fairly small, and again, you don't need a big one, but you can use one that matches whatever you have, and then we can slide the heat shrink over the resistor just like that, and then we can use the barrel of the soldering iron to shrink the tubing down, and that will help hold that in place. But the reason I like to do the wrapping around is because I have had it happen on occasion when I'm shrinking the tubing here, because the barrel of the soldering iron is hot, it can make that solder joint melt and they fall apart, and then you have to go back and redo it. So it's a minor thing. I like to do it. You don't have to. So we're going to bend the resistor here. We're going to trim it, and then we're going to put our flux on our terminal here for the backup light. And then we're going to take the resistor and we're going to solder it in place. So we're going to put a little bit of solder on the end of the iron here, and we're going to just reach in here just like that. And Whoops. I let it go too soon. There we go. And now we have a nice clean joint. You can see right there where the resistor's tied in. It's pretty much insulated. Then, just as an insurance policy, again, I like to go on the underside and cut off any excess of that lead through there. So you have a nice, tight, clean joint. And then we take these wires and tidy them up. Now, these are the backup number boards. These are actually, I'm going to wire these to the FX4, which is the fourth lighting output. And so we're basically going to do the same thing. And so when we look at our decoder, just double checking. So this is going to be the FX3, the FX4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then, like I said, these are our speaker terminals, and these are our motor terminals. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing here. But since we're going to the FX4, which is right here, we just measure that out to be about like that. Make your cut. And then we're going to do the same thing like we did with that other resistor. So we're going to come in here, we're going to strip the insulation off. And then now I need to get out some of my heat shrink tubing. This is a collection of heat shrink tubing I've had for years. Just short little pieces. And I use a ton of these. And so they're very long, so I tend to cut them in half and double the coverage on it. But you can get all kinds of different sizes. I know we as SoundTraxx offer a shrink tubing kit that you can get that has a bunch of different sizes in it. So we're going to slide our wire over the terminal here, or over the wire, I mean, shrink tubing. We're going to twist the end. Now we're going to take our resistor, and we're going to do the same thing like I did before, where I wrap the resistor around, or wrap the wire. Good God, I can't remember how to speak apparently. We're going to wrap our wire around the lead of the resistor. We're going to push that up against there, put some flux, and then we're going to bring our soldering iron over here, and we're going to make our connection just like that. And then we're going to get our cutter, cut the excess off. And what this does, this also helps give you less exposed wire. You want to make sure that all of the any metal part is as covered as possible, minimizes the potential for short circuits or anything like that. And then the shrink tubing just slides over the resistor, and depending on the size, you may not need to shrink it down. I like to shrink it down just to make sure, so that it holds in place. But usually what I'll do is I'll go over the first little bump of the resistor here to make sure it has something to bite on. Because if it's just the exposed wire, then it potentially can slide off if it's handled roughly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my flux here on my FX4 joint, and I'm going to trim a little bit of this excess off here, because I don't need all of that, and then I can trim the excess once I'm completely in place. So we're going to come in here, grab some solder. Now when I'm angling this across the board and then out of the way of the Bluetooth chip to make sure that we don't interfere with the Bluetooth transmission. So there you go. And that's all there is to it. Now our backlights are wired up. So since these wires are right here, let's go ahead and do the motor. Now these are threaded out on the other side over here. So I'm going to thread them back under the decoder and above the motor so that they fit and come out on the other side. And then we're going to go to the motor terminals. Now again, knowing that the gray seems to be our V+, we're going to go ahead and test to be sure. So we're going to trim our insulation. Now to test this, we can put the model on the hard surface here. We can move the soft one out of the way. And then we're going to take our two wires, And this is where you can use that 9-volt battery with the unregulated one, but I'm just going to use this one. It's another 9-volt battery. So our V plus side goes to the gray, and you can see that it's trying to move forward, so that would be, in fact, be the case. So our gray wire in this case is going to be the V plus for the motor leads. So we're going to go ahead and twist the wires together here, and then we're going to tin the ends, just like we've done on everything in the past. Okay, let's tin. And there we go. Now the advantage to this decoder is all the terminals are labeled on the underside, so I don't need to have the wiring diagram handy. But the forward one is motor plus, and the rear one is motor minus. So we're going to go ahead and take our wire and shove it up in through the hole this time. Again, you can do this however you like. So with both of those wires in place, we're going to have to hold them. So we'll go ahead and make the solder joint. Oops. Didn't actually get any solder on there. There we go. And then we'll get a little bit more. Whoops, that one fell out. Put it back up in place, and then we'll solder it. There we go. All right, both of those are soldered in place. So now again, we're going to trim the excess, because you don't need all that extra wire sticking up and potential for problems coming up. And then all we need to do now is we can just tuck these wires underneath the decoder, so that way they don't interfere with the body shelf fitting down on the model. And it's pretty straightforward. So basically now what I'm going to do here on the rest, I'm going to do the exact same thing I did with these lights back here on the front. So this is my headlight wires, and then these are my class lights for the front, and they're going to go to the FX3 terminal. So I'm going to do that off of camera, and then when I come back, we'll finish putting the speakers in and mount them all up. So I'll be back in a moment. Okay, so as you can see, I finished up these front lights. I've got my headlight LED here, our resistor and wire here, and then the front class lights, the wire goes to here. And so all of this will be tucked away when the body shell is put on, and then we have our red wire as we've shown there. So the good news is we're almost done. So now we just need to mount our speakers. So what we're going to do is from the underside, we're going to thread our wire up through the side here where they were before. And then we're going to mount our speaker back in place. And then we're going to put our screws back in to hold the fuel tank back in place. Let's see, where's the screwdriver? There we go. All right, so now our fuel tank's back in place. You can see it's right there. All right, so now we have our red. We have our red and our black wire. And since the speaker terminals are right here, we're going to go ahead and come up from the underside. So we can cut our wire about right there. And then we're going to strip and tin the ends. Oops. And what I'm doing here, just in case you aren't sure, I'm twisting the ends so that we have no fray wires, no stray strands that potentially can cause a short if that strand were to fit something or touch something on the underside of the circuit board. So that way when we tin the end of the wire, we know that all the strands of that wire are complete and together. so that way we don't have to worry about any loose or stray. Now, positive, negative, honestly, really doesn't make any difference whatsoever. So we're just going to go ahead and put the, let's move these wires out of the way. These motor wires are in the way. So we're going to put the black wire in here, and the red wire will go in the second one. And like I said, it makes no difference, positive, negative, just as long as your two speakers are consistent. So now we're going to get some solder. We're going to solder these last two in place. There's the red wire and the black wire. And again, we're going to trim the excess wire up here because we don't need all that extra up on top. And there we go. So there's our installation. So now we're going to take these wires and kind of tuck them up and underneath the body, underneath the decoder here, so they're up and out of the way, because we want to make sure they're not rubbing up against the motor flywheel, because if they are, then what can happen is eventually that flywheel wheel will actually kind of cut into the insulation and potentially can actually cause the wire to break. So there you go. There's our installation. Our decoder's in good shape. Okay, now our decoder installation is done. Let's go take it out to the layout and take it on a test run just to make sure everything works okay. Okay, so here we are at the layout. Let's go ahead and put it on the track and test it out. So we've got our sound powered up. We've got our DCC system here to start. We're going to blow our horn. We're going to move from the forward direction. Looks like we're good. We're going to move in the reverse direction. Looks like we're good. Let's test the headlight. Test the backup light. You can see that it's on my hand. Now we're going to test the other lights, which is function FX3, which is function 24. So you can see that we have our class lights on. And then we can turn those off, and then we'll turn on the number boards. As you can see, those are on, and we can turn those off. That's button 25. Now we're going to go ahead and connect in the app. So now I have my Blunami app. You can see Blunami V1.0 is connected. We're going to go ahead and click that. Now we're going to go ahead and test it. We're going to blow our horn, and now we're going to start moving in the forward direction. As you can see, the app is working. We're going to move in the reverse direction. Looks like everything's working. So now let's go back to the workbench. So we'll go set some basic CVs, such as the address, some basic parameters like sound settings, things like that. Then it's ready to start turning revenue service. So let's head back to the workbench and we'll be right back. Okay, so we're back here at the workbench and we have our shell. So literally all we have to do is just kind of slide that into place and everything should match up. The shell snaps right in place. We're good to go. And as you can see, we've got our free floating of trucks. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get our couplers, and we're going to go ahead and get our coupler boxes and couplers built and reinstalled. And so this is where it literally is just a matter of putting the coupler into the box. I'm going to put the box top on here. And it kind of holds in place, but it doesn't really snap. So, but then we just slide it in through the front here, just kind of the same way we did when we removed it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take one of our screws that are in here, our coupler screw, and we're just going to slide it into the mount hole there. And then we're going to take our Phillips head screwdriver, and we're just going to screw that in place. Then we're going to do that for the other side the same way. So we got our coupler and our coupler box. And this is the kind of basic stuff you'd normally know how to do when you're doing normal maintenance on your locomotives as well. So this isn't all that exciting, but we're going to go ahead and show it to you in the essence of full disclosure. So we slide that in there. And now we grab our other coupler screw And again, we just mount that into the hole. There we go. We want to make sure it's not cross-threaded or anything. If there's any resistance, make sure to back that off. So there, our couplers are installed in place. So let's go ahead and head back out to the layout. We'll set some basic parameters using the Blunami app. And we'll go ahead and get this one ready for revenue service. Okay, here we go. So guys, here we are. We're back at the layout. And as you can see here in the side screen, I've got our Blunami app opened. So again, we have our horn control. We can turn on and off our headlight. And then we can change directions and you'll see the backup light on. So just a couple of things really quickly. You guys have seen all the features and capabilities. We're going to go ahead and do some basic stuff. So first thing here, we're going to go ahead and change the DCC address because we have locomotive 6607. And so by simply typing in 6607, when we hit apply, you can see that the app automatically understands that's the extended address and puts it into the decoder. Now here's where we get our loco nickname. This allows us to change the name. So we can do, here we can do Conrail C30-7, whoops, 6607. So that way we understand and know what it is. So now, as you can see here on the app, we can see Conrail C30-7 and number 6607. So that's a really easy way to do this. Couple of things. This is a C30-7, so we're going to go ahead and go to main sounds. We're going to change our prime mover to an FDL 16. And this allows us multiple things to be able to do. So we can go ahead and change our bell also to a GE FDL medium slow or medium fast. Let's go ahead and pick a fast. And so when we test our bell, you can kind of hear that bell go. And this is a 3-chime horn. Looks like an RS3L Leslie, which was very common in this particular time. So we can go ahead and put that in here and test it. So, and this is where you can go in and make all of your adjustments, whether it's a sound volume or other things. But these are just some basic changes that we've made. Now in the C30-7, this particular era, we had the engine-driven air compressor. Whoop. So we have the engine-driven air compressor. So now when we hear the air compressor, instead of that typical whooping sound you would hear with the modern, you'll actually hear more of like a just a regular engine-driven, well, air compressor. So guys, this is some of the basic sounds that you can go through and do. You can also set momentum, things like that. Let's show you the class lights on here. You can see that the class lights light up. And here on the app, we can actually change the name of the FX3 to front. We'll just do F class lights. And then we can change this to rear number boards. So this way we can identify what all of these are in our app, and so that way we don't have to remember it. So this is just a few things that will help you get started with your Blunami. So hopefully this has been helpful for you. If you have any questions, send us an email to support@soundtraxx.com, or be sure to leave a comment or question down below. We'll try to get to you. But if you have real technical questions, just email our office at support@soundtraxx.com, so that way we can actually answer your questions more in depth rather than short responses that might be on YouTube. Also, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, so that way you can get more content like this, whether you like installation videos or if you want to do other things such as CV programming, setup of the features, things like that. So be sure you subscribe so that next time we post content like that, you can be there to see it as well. So guys, that's this episode. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.